listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you and welcome to The Briefing. Happy Monday. Influencers are masters at showing you how to live your best life, and their TikToks and memes can do everything from teaching you how to better manage your money to getting fit, and now, more and more, how to be a man.
The themes that pop out are get ripped, get rich, and get a girl.
Yes, the rise of the male masculinity influencer, how they've accidentally become mainstream, and what happens when it goes too far is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Monday, the 28th of April.
Good morning, Chris, and good morning to you listening. We are less than a week out from the federal election and our leaders have faced off for a fourth and final time. Anthony Albanese has claimed victory after clashing with Peter Dutton in a Channel 7 leaders debate over things like cost of living, the welcome to country and the threat of China on Australia's national security. Now, the Prime Minister was declared the clear winner of the debate, winning the approval of 50% of the 60 undecided voters, while the Liberal leader came away with 25% of the room and the remaining quarter still undecided. What we got from this debate, though, was a breakdown of results by issue. For example, for cost of living specifically, Albo won 65% of voters compared to Dutton on just 16%, which was a big dip from last week's debate on Channel 9 where he won marginally on economic management, Chris.
Yeah, and one of the most polarising issues of the night came when a question was asked about welcome to countries, which came off the back end of booing by a neo-Nazi at a dawn service in Melbourne on Friday. Now, that was everywhere over the weekend, and it was about halfway through that question came into play. While both leaders condemned the specific incident and behaviour, they were divided on how they would treat welcome to countries moving forward.
We have a great privilege, from my perspective, of sharing this continent with the oldest continuous culture on earth.
But Prime Minister, do you think it's overdone, the welcome to country?
It's up to people to determine whether they have a welcome to country or not. But from my perspective, for major events, it is, of course, a sign of respect.
I think at the opening of Parliament it's appropriate, and I think at other very significant events of that nature, yes. But I do think that the most important thing we can do is provide practical reconciliation.
Okay. Now, that wasn't the only issue that saw a strong response from Peter Dutton. Throughout the night, he did shut down comparisons to Trump, saying government efficiency is good policy, not a Trumpian policy, and wasted absolutely no time when asked who or what represents Australia's greatest threat.
The biggest concern from our intelligence agencies and our defence agency is in relation to the Communist Party of China.
Whereas Albo was a little bit more careful.
Well, we know that China seeks to increase its influence in the region. But the relationship is complex as well, because China is our major trading partner.
Yeah, so a little bit there towing the line, and for good reason. You know, that is the point of diplomacy, and that is the role of prime ministers there. So there's not a lot of criticisms around that response this morning. Where there are some criticisms and where there are heaps and heaps of comments was one of the questions both leaders were asked last night, and they were quizzed on the price of a dozen eggs. Now, Tara Cassidy, you and I both do weekly shops.
Yes.
What do you reckon is the price of a dozen eggs at the moment?
Look, I saw this. I've got not a clue. I felt actually kind of bad for them. They always get stitched up with these really specific questions. Like you said, I go to the shops every week and I still don't know. But their answers were not close. One of them is not even close. I think Dutton said something like $4. What was it? Oh my gosh. No, read the room.
Yeah, I know. And then Albert was like, he had a second crack at it. He then went, $7. So he was a little closer to the high 8s mark that they had put up on the board. But I mean,
cost of living.
Yeah, it really dominated this debate. And in the end, it spelled out the winner, and that was Anthony Albanese.
To Canada now. Police in Vancouver say the number of people killed after a car drove into a crowded Filipino street festival has risen to 11 and dozens more are injured. Acting Police Chief Steve Rye says a 30-year-old man who was allegedly behind the wheel is now in custody.
While I'm not prepared to speak about the potential motive,
I can now say with confidence that the evidence in this case does not lead us to believe this was an act of terrorism.
He says the man has a significant history of interactions with police and health professionals relating to mental health, but there are concerns that the death toll could rise from this incident.
Back home, hundreds of people have rallied against gendered violence in New South Wales after the death of 19-year-old Audrey Griffin. Her body was found in a creek in late March after she'd been on a night out with friends. A 53-year-old man, Adrian Torrens, was later charged with her murder but died in custody before facing trial.
And heavy rain didn't turn away protesters who marched across the Central Coast yesterday, many with signs saying that more needs to be done to keep women safe and enough is enough. There was one protester calling out casual misogyny, saying it's what's shaping future generations, where others argued that the government's not doing enough to tackle this nationwide crisis. Now, Audrey Griffin is the 23rd woman who's been killed by violence in Australia. That's according to Australian Femicide Watch, which is a project which tracks the number of killings. However, since Audrey's death, that number's actually risen to 24 in just the first 4 months of the year. Meanwhile, last year, there were 103 women killed in violent crimes in Australia.
Top officials in the US administration, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are pushing Russia this week to get a peace deal done with Ukraine. And that follows a one-on-one meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican over the weekend. Just in case you missed it, in case you weren't tuned into what was going on this weekend, the pair met on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral, which is ordinarily not the occasion to be having high-level talks, but hey, here we are, we saw it. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, they were there for about 15 minutes, sitting knee to knee with no aides, journalists, all microphones in sight. And those scenes were in stark contrast to what the whole world witnessed at the end of February this year.
You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Now, the Ukrainian president remained mostly tight-lipped on his meeting with Trump in the Vatican, but says it was productive and he is hopeful for peace. The renewed pressure for a truce between Russia and Ukraine comes little under a week since Vice President J.D. Vance threatened to walk away from negotiations after Ukrainian and European officials rejected a proposal involving giving up territory to Russia.
3, 2, 1.
And the world's first ever sperm race has gone off without a bang. Thanks to a group of college kids in the US. The tech-savvy teens conducted a reproductive health competition dubbed Spermatoza in a live ticketed contest in Los Angeles, with VIP tickets going for $1,000.
Wow. And yeah, the competition used the sperm of two teens from rivaling California unis for the ultimate battle of fertility and fitness, as they called it, with their sperm then watched under a microscope across 3 races.
My testosterone's higher. My training is better. He's not prepared. Some been saying I'm the LeBron of sperm racing.
The LeBron of sperm racing. Okay. And look, the winner took home $10,000 in a cash prize, which is wild. And this all came about due to 3 young co-founders. One of them is a popular influencer, and they had a simple goal of raising awareness about male infertility, which, I mean, we are talking about it here in Australia, Chris, so I think they've done their job well. Tick, tick, tick.
Yeah, yes, they have raised awareness towards something. I don't know whether it was male infertility, but hey, I mean, if the conversation's happening, that's great news. Thank you, Tara. That brings our headlines to a close. Coming up next is Helen Smith's Deep Dive. She's looking into the accidental rise of male masculinity influencers, who they are, what they do, and why, even if you don't follow a toxic one, you could be fed their content every single day. That's coming up for you next. Stick around.
Hey, it's Helen Smith here with this episode of The Briefing. Do you know what a masculinity influencer is? Well, a new study that surveyed more than 3,000 young men aged 16 to 25 across Australia, the UK and the US is suggesting that they're no longer fringe and they've hit the mainstream. finding more young men are turning towards these figures for not only entertainment, but for direction, motivation, and inspiration. With some giving men a masculinity map on how to be a man and how to fix yourself. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, isn't that the job of an influencer? To influence people and gain a following. And you'd be right. But following these creators, even the ones who create harmless content, can come at a cost. The cost being men's mental health. And with suicide a leading cause of premature death in young men worldwide, who needs to step up and how can we have better conversations about masculinity? Dr Zac Seidler is the Global Director of Men's Health Research at Movember, who co-authored this report, Young Men's Health in a Digital World. Zac, why are you calling out masculinity content?
Well, there's been so much chat about men and masculinity in the zeitgeist at the moment. You know, culture in the wake of the Adolescence TV show and the amount of commentary about Andrew Tate and others has really meant that every man and his dog has an opinion about this, but very few people are actually doing the hard yards and researching how we're going to go about understanding young men and how we're going to actually solve some of the issues that they're facing. And that's what this report and Movember are really trying to do.
Before we get into what a male masculinity influencer is, how are you defining masculinity?
We are seeking a flexible notion of masculinity. We're not trying to pin it down to traditional ideals of being a protector provider, being stoic and strong and dominant. We are in fact suggesting that it is much more about knowing when and how to apply those facets. We're not here to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're not here to promote the notion of toxic masculinity. And the organisation is directly at odds with that term because it isolates young men. It doesn't call them in to be a part of the solution. It calls them out as the problem. And so when we talk about defining masculinity, we're really focused on the whole man, which is their idea of their relational health, their emotional health, their mental health, their physical health, their financial health, all of these things that make up a man. And really, I think that we've done men and boys a disservice by narrowing in on really simplistic, stereotypical ideas of what it means to be a guy.
We'll get into some of those solutions a little bit later, but firstly, can you just explain to me what a male masculinity influencer is?
When we talk about a men and masculinity influencer, what really became abundantly clear when you start to go through TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, all of these, online spaces, is that the themes that pop out are get ripped, get rich, and get a girl. Those are the things that these guys are espousing. Lots of them are doing it in very innocuous ways with some positive ideology around, being respectful to women, about, going and working hard to make a buck. But lots of it is also extremely harmful and is reinforcing these rigid ideas of masculinity, is reinforcing a victim mentality, is fueling resentment towards women and girls when in fact we really actually want to be creating harmony rather than more polarization. And so this content is very much focused on self-betterment. It's very much focused on growth and development over time. And that's what hooks these guys in and often weaponizes their attention, commercializing it in many instances for harmful gains.
So the job of an influencer is in the name, to influence. And you've just mentioned there young men are turning to some of these influencers for motivation or inspiration. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to better yourself. So when does it become dangerous? Where's the line?
I think what's really important, as you said there, is that this has been talked about in a very fringe way to date. It's really been spoken about as if this is happening in the dark recesses of the internet. What our report found is that 60+% of young men across the globe are engaging with this content. That is a mainstream issue. This is happening day in and day out for hours on end. Young men are watching this content. And so to broad brushstroke it and suggest that it's all harmful and it's all bad is really not a good way of connecting with men and understanding their experience, which is very diverse and nuanced. Now, the way in which it shifts from helpful to harmful is actually really nuanced and really difficult to pin down. And the problem is the algorithm. So we don't have any insight into the algorithm. We've been struggling as researchers for a very long time to gain access to some data to be able to work out how it actually functions, because young guys are telling us they're watching something that is actually really helpful to them, and then the next video is misogynistic garbage. And the thing is that it's thematically grouped this stuff together, and it says, oh, you're a young guy between 12 to 25, this is the type of stuff that you like. And lots of these young guys are saying, actually, half of it I actually really enjoy and it makes me feel good about myself. But washed amongst that is all of this crap that they actually have no desire to watch, and that is seriously shifting their attitudes and values in a direction which we really don't want it to go.
You mentioned before the harms of using the label toxic masculinity and how most men, and young men in particular, switch off completely when they hear that. But bad behaviours should be called out. How can we do that without slapping a label on it?
Last time I came on this podcast, I got a lot of heat for my beliefs around this term. And as I said last time, I'm not suggesting that we excuse or condone bad behaviour. Bad behaviour needs to be called out, especially when it comes to the way in which, disrespect, harm, homicide takes place with women and girls. But when it comes to the aim of improving gender equality, when it comes to the aim of improving men's mental health, those are our goals here. And you need to find the best way to get us there. And when men are crying out and saying, do not use this term, it is a catch-all and it makes us feel ashamed, it makes us feel angry, and it distances us from the conversation, we need to listen to that. And so as a result, the vast majority of guys are going to agree that there are really harmful ways in which masculinity can interact with their day-to-day life. No one's in disagreement around that. And so what we actually need to do is be specific. We shouldn't be labeling toxic in front of masculinity, because so many guys go, even though we have academic nuance around it, and that's not how the term was created, that doesn't matter. Because when it comes down to it, Joe Blow on the street who's reading the paper in the morning and sees a headline with that term goes, I'm out. And that is not okay for us if we want to move the dial here.
Is being masculine a bad thing?
Definitely not. And that's what it comes down to when we're talking about definitions here. It's so important that we actually open up lines of communication about what being a man means today, about what contemporary masculinity is. It is a beautiful thing. There's the beauty and the beast of masculinity. There is a really dark side to it when it is rigid and is played to the nth degree. But really, society thrives off men being protectors and providers in a healthy way. So we should actually have a far more critical eye on what are the things that are benefiting society, benefiting men, helping them actually flourish and aspire towards a form of masculinity that makes themselves, their families, their communities healthier and safer.
Okay, so what do we know about the young men engaging in this content? What did you find out about them? Are they just the everyday guy on the street? They might just be your boyfriend, your partner, or your best friend. Who are they?
As I said, there is a really mainstream connection with this content. It's happening with blokes of all shapes and sizes. So we don't need to pivot to the guy in a hoodie in his basement mentality here. This could be your boyfriend. It could be anybody, really. Many of these guys who are connecting with this content are actually educated. They're really well employed. They've got good financial prospects. They're all dating. They're in the world. These are your everyday men. And the data showed us that many of them are actually finding this sense of motivation and inspiration from watching this content. But on the flip side, those who engage with the content are actually far more likely to be showing feelings of distress, hopelessness, nervousness, and taking part in risk-taking behaviours like steroid use and diet pills. So there is a light and dark, as with anything here. There is health and harm, and we need to be willing to hold those two truths at the same time.
This content, as you said, is becoming more mainstream. And I think as society, we are getting a little bit better at recognising when a young man is being negatively influenced. It can be reflected in the language or the way they treat others, particularly women. What's your advice to someone listening when it comes to dealing or speaking with a man in their life that might be being negatively influenced?
It's such an important question, Helen. And what the answer is here is leaning in, not leaning out. It's about curiosity and openness and transparency. I've spoken to so many parents over the years who have found out that their son is watching some of this content and have freaked out. They've disengaged, they've taken away the phone, and they've just said, no, you can't see anyone, you can't watch any of this, this is a disaster. Now, that is understandable. There's a lot of fear that is going on because the headlines are really perpetuating that fear. What we need instead is to ground ourselves in conversation, to ground ourselves in an understanding that these young men are seeking out this content for a reason. They have unmet needs. And so we need to meet those needs by connecting with them. They want purpose, they want meaning, they want development, they want to understand how they fit into society. Our parents, our teachers, our clinicians, our journalists all need to do a better job at making them feel seen and heard. And so it's not about pushing them away, it's about calling them in and actually having that conversation, saying, hey mate, what's going on? Why are you watching this and what does it make you feel? And what can we do next to actually, bring about this conversation in a meaningful way?
We've seen the government step in with social media and attempt to try and tackle similar issues. Are you proposing content blocks or age verifications? Would regulations around social media actually work?
I think that we really need to have better transparency when it comes to these platforms. We know that the bottom line reigns supreme here, which is that commercialization is everything. And so we need to be willing to call them out from a health response and say, this stuff is harming people. We've had a lot of research showing that Meta have actually been creating a lot of harm with young women and eating disorders and suicidality. We're now here to show that lots of this man and masculinity content is fundamentally harming the well-being of our young guys. And so what we want is to engage in this conversation in good faith and say, this is not the way that we want to operate. This is not what young men want and need. And there are benefits to this stuff. We need to get them in the room and you need to listen to what's happening here.
Zac, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
That was Dr Zac Seidler there, the Global Director of Men's Mental Health Research at Movember. And thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone else you think might enjoy it. It's a really great way you can support us in everything we do here at The Briefing. So is sharing our social media posts. You can check us out at Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube, just search Listener Newsroom. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.